Jail. 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 Go. Oh. Jail. 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 Jail.
Our prison system here in America is broken. We have more than 2.2 million people in jail. That's more people than any other country in the world. And African Americans are 6 times more likely to be imprisoned than someone of another race. But why? What could cause this recent spike in people that we imprison? Well, somewhere along the way, we started to think being tough on crime meant being tough on criminals. But that's not the same thing. In 1986, the first of many tough-on-crime laws was enacted. This specific law set a minimum punishment for crimes that related to drugs. More importantly, though, this would set in motion an era in which America was tough on crime. Now you could be imprisoned for almost anything, and prisons were starting to fill up. Unfortunately, most of these new inmates were black because ever since the Jim Crow era, African Americans have been unfairly made out to be the bad guy, which is why some call this new mass imprisonment of African Americans the second Jim Crow movement. How does this have anything to do with the Jim Crow era, which took place more than 100 years ago? Well, first of all, it didn't. Many of the civil rights movements we have discussed in this class have been a result of the segregation brought on by Jim Crow laws, which means the Jim Crow era lasted well into the 1900s. During the Jim Crow movement, white policemen who held the power would imprison African Americans for any reason they could find, so that African Americans would go back to doing slave labor as prisoners. And studies show that if your father was a prisoner, then you're 30 times more likely to go to prison yourself, which means the imprisonment of African Americans is hereditary and can trace its roots back to Jim Crow. There are hundreds of thousands of people in prison who are there unjustly. America has about 5% of the world's population, but it has about 25% of the world's prisoners, which means about 1 in every 4 prisoners in the world is imprisoned here in America. This is an outrageous statistic, and it has to be fixed. Realizing how bad this issue is, Democrats and Republicans are now working together to try and fix it. In fact, Piper Kerman, the author of Orange is the New Black, has this to say on the subject.
I think that there is an incredible level of consensus now, in red states, in blue states, in every party all over this country, that we need to reduce our prison population. We need to make significant changes in the criminal justice system because no one in this country is proud of having the biggest prison population in human history.
For a while, this country was moving in the right direction, but earlier this year, Attorney General Jeff Sessions created a bill called Mandatory Minimum, which, exactly like the tough-on-crime laws of the 1980s, creates a minimum punishment for certain crimes. If history is allowed to repeat itself, we will create the same problems that we did way back with the tough-on-crime laws, and we will perpetuate this legacy of injustice. The most important thing you can do is spread awareness. Nothing can get done to fix the problem if everyone doesn't know about the problem first. And if the problem isn't fixed, then the African American community can never achieve actual equality because they're being so unfairly treated. It's up to us to reduce the population of prisons in this country, and it's up to us to end that legacy of injustice.